and few, because if the results showed that I was something else, that would have meant my whole life was a lie. So it's all good so far. Hello and welcome back to Background Voice with me, your host Elle. As you can see, I'm actually being consistent with these uploads, so well done me. I'm currently in Toronto and I came back from exploring the town. Today's my first full day here, and I just felt really inspired by the view from my room. I thought it would be a really nice background to the video, and seeing as I was already dressed up from going out and exploring downtown Toronto, I just thought, why not? Let's film an episode. Hopefully the quality will be alright. I mean, it's all about the information on this channel anyway. I'm still getting there with all the fancy stuff, but that's all good. And yeah, so before we start today's episode, I just wanted to explain a little disclaimer, which will be true for this episode, every episode before it, and every episode after it. But this channel is just me researching things that I'm interested in and me presenting that information to you. So it will be based on research and studies and, things that I could find out, as well as when it comes to certain topics, I will be talking about my personal experiences as a British Tamil and therefore my opinions at points. But everything is just me telling you what I found out. Basically, that goes to say I'm not an expert in any of the topics that I'm talking about, and if I am an expert on any of the topics, I will let you know. And I'm not an expert on this topic either, but that's fine, because I've done my research and that's the main thing. And I've got my notes here on my laptop, which is balancing in quite a dangerous way on the couch armrest. So I think this video will be a success as long as I don't smash my laptop. If my laptop stays intact by the end of this video, then I'm all good with it. So let's get on to this week's episode. Some of you might have taken the 23andMe DNA test. I did. And it was quite a weird experience because the first time I did the test, they weren't able to find anything out from my DNA sample, which weirded me out. And then when I sent my second DNA sample in as requested, they weren't able to find all of my racial makeup. So I don't really know what I am fully, but I still have a good enough picture of, where my ancestry has come from. And the part that, they couldn't find out, I'm just convinced that I'm part mythical creature, because that's the only thing that seems to make sense to me. Of course, there are many other scientific explanations for why they probably couldn't find out what that DNA, racial makeup was, but I just like saying I'm a mythical creature, so we're going to roll with that one. Anyway, majority of the results showed that I was South Asian, and that's expected. I was kind of glad towards this, and few, because if the results showed that I was something else, that would have meant my whole life was a lie. So it's all good so far. There was also a little bit of Southeast Asian, a little bit of East Asian, a bit of Native American, which I thought, I don't know how that got in there, but that's cool as well. And of course, a bit part mythical creature, because I am an ethereal creature. So recently I've started to get a bit more interested on what race is, because we do tend to hear things about there's no race except from the human race, but then we also know politically races do play a big role. So I wanted to look into the science behind it and see what the studies actually have to say about race and if race does exist. We'll get into all the science, the studies, the findings, the research in this episode. So previously there was a belief that there were 5 races. So there were the Asians, the Africans, the Europeans, the Native Americans, and the Oceanians. Oceanian? I don't think I'm pronouncing that correctly, but yes, those are the 5 races that they used to believe existed. Not gonna lie, I think scientists were probably struggling with a breakthrough, and one guy just thought, yeah, let's just name all the continents and say that that's it. Those are all the races. But now we have a lot more information, a lot more research has been done on this topic, and we have a better understanding on the science behind race, the biological understanding behind race. In a landmark paper based on the Human Genome Project, scientists found that there are no individual races as we know them, but instead there is a single human race, not in sociological terms, but according to biology. The project found that there is more genetic variation within a single population subgroup than between 2 different population subgroups. For example, there may be more genetic diversity within a population in Asia than between the same population and a different population in Europe. While certain populations tend to cluster around certain regions of the world, the variation that exists between them is continuous, not discrete. And for those of you who haven't taken statistics in a while, which I think will be a majority of the people watching this, let me break it down in easier terms. When we say that the variations are continuous as opposed to discrete, we're basically saying there are very slight variations from region to region. That can be within even the same country, but also from one country to the neighbouring country as well. And because of that, it's very difficult for us to group people into discrete racial groups, just because there are so many different variations that we're dealing with because of the continuous variations from population to population. You could basically break down those discrete groups into as many groups as you want based on whatever characteristics you're choosing to label. So if you wanted to go with the colour of people's skin, you could decide certain shade ranges and break people's races down into that, or you might go, okay, I want to break down the races into certain height groups or certain eye shapes. So the discrete groups racially would really be defined by the physical characteristics that you define to make that racial group. And we do tend to find that people that are closer together geographically tend to share similar physical characteristics, just because of climate and the environment will affect the way they evolve. They've evolved over time in that particular space. So it doesn't actually need to mean they have to be in a geographically similar location, like in proximity. They can be in very different locations on the earth, literally on opposite sides of the earth, and provided that the climate is the same or similar, they could share the same physical characteristics and therefore the same race. Scientists believe we originated in Africa, and over time we had travelled around the world and splintered off into different groups. Those different groups then settled in different parts of the globe, and they started to evolve, and during that evolution, different physical characteristics, different variations physically started to come up because they needed those to survive. So obviously people in hotter climates tend to have darker skin because we need more melanin to protect us. And people in hotter climates also tend to be a little bit shorter just because we don't need to grow as tall to get as much sunlight, whereas people that live in colder countries tend to be taller because of the lack of sunlight. And over the past few hundred years, so I would say quite recently, we now have the ability to travel to different countries and different regions and settle in regions that our physical characteristics might not be most suited for. And when I say places that aren't suited for our physical characteristics, I just mean we have obviously evolved to live in a certain climate and a certain space, but that doesn't mean that we can't live wherever we want. And because of this continuous variation in physical characteristics, race does not exist, because these variations are very difficult to categorize, because there are way too many variations to categorize. And I guess it makes sense. There are quite a few different countries around the world where, even though it's one country, there are the groups of people that live in those countries have very different physical characteristics and would be classed as a different race socially because of that. Take South America. Within South America, there is a large variety of races. And in these countries, there are divisions according to what you would pass as racially. So you may pass as white or you may pass as black. But if you take someone from one of these South American countries and take them to North America, what's going to happen is the racial group that they were in back home in South America will be different to what they would be considered in North America. They would probably be considered Latinx. And because of that, race is subjective and it's based on societal divisions. But does that mean that we can ignore race altogether? Well, no, because there are still social divisions that we experience with regards to race, and there are characteristics socially that we associate with certain races as well. But that, I think, is something I'll discuss in more detail in another episode. But this particular episode, I just wanted to talk about the science behind races and how biologically race doesn't exist. And this particular episode is linked to the episode I did on the default, and you can see that somewhere. It will probably be somewhere in my description, where I go into a lot more detail on society and how certain ethnic groups are considered raceless while others are racialized. So you should go and check that out as well if you're interested. But that's all I have for today's episode, and that's all that I have on my mind. So what do you think?